Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Deal Scout. My name is Josh, fellow deal makers. On today's show, we're going to talk about startups. We're going to talk about DJing. We're going to talk about all sorts of fun stuff and everything in between. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man.
This is great.
Yeah, so you're in Florida in a little place called Miami, the little
That's right.
country of Miami down there. So,
Which we moved to about 7 years ago from New York City. And I had watched the tech scene grow up in New York City. I had helped build a company in San Francisco. So I commuted to San Francisco for a while. So I was very familiar with both of those tech scenes. And then Miami had some stuff going on, but then in the past year, it's just exploded. It's great.
yeah.
Happy to be here.
Well, we're welcome to Florida. We love the country of Florida. It's really great here. As the whole other, United States falls apart, Florida seems to be doing good. So with that was my little plug for how much I love Florida. So Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and some of the things you're working on?
Sure. I am a serial entrepreneur. And I started my first company, I guess at like 25 years old. And it was around presentations. So trying to make a better PowerPoint essentially, which worked. And we ended up getting a bunch of Fortune 500 customers and built that business a few different ways. One, trying to finance it myself through customers. And then in a second iteration, raising some VC money. Did a few rounds of funding. That company eventually got acquired about 10 years ago. And then since then have worked with other entrepreneurs, have run a few accelerator programs. And in that process realized that, I had a problem as a developer, as a technical founder, that all of a sudden I was running a company. I didn't really know how to run a company. I knew how to code, but I didn't know how to run a company. And I realized that every other technical founder has that problem too. So I've gotten very involved in how do we get the numbers to click for non-finance founders. And have essentially been building a product called Rocket Pro Forma, which is an easy way to create financial projections. But the punchline is, in creating the financial projections, you're also creating the mental map that you can use to run the business. So you understand how the financials of the business work, and then you can also go out and pitch investors and confidently talk about what goes into your plan. So in a weird way, after reinventing PowerPoint, I'm now trying to reinvent Excel. So I guess I'm just knocking down the Office apps. I guess Word is next. My third chapter.
Yeah.
In my professional career.
You're going after Bill Gates. You're gonna take
That's
over
right.
one little program at a time. So
and he's distracted right now, so I think I have the advantage.
Yeah, you got him. That's the David and Goliath story right there.
That's right.
You're gonna go after it. Well, I love it. I'll help. So with what you're doing, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation company that you built, right? Like, talk to us about like why you built that, how you built that. Technical founder. Did you have other, founders that were, more of the visionary or the salesy kind of group? Like, kind of walk us through the story there.
Sure. Okay. So what I started doing pretty early on was doing custom development work because I was good at coding, but I would also do visuals as well. So it was like the era of multimedia. Like, I don't know if you remember any of those like interactive CD-ROMs and kiosks, like, sort of early mid 90s. So I was doing that kind of stuff, but I started getting corporate gigs. So I would do like product launches, or I did some multimedia kiosks that sat in the window of Pfizer's headquarters on 42nd Street in New York City. Or I did like an interactive kiosk that IBM put together to tour with the Olympics torch one summer. Like, I was doing like these random things. I did a big thing for a Colgate launch. And it was kind of this combination of graphics and cool programming, and we were always kind of pushing the limits. And through that, I just got really good at this corporate stuff. Through that, with a design firm I did a lot of work with, they ended up getting hired by Discovery Channel, and Discovery wanted to build presentations that looked like television but were editable like PowerPoint, so that they could sell the ads that you see on Discovery and TLC and Animal Planet. And so we built that. I built it with the design firm, this great shop called Marcolino Design in Philadelphia, like amazing, amazing design. And they also wanted a library feature. So this was like mid 90s before the cloud. So nothing was connected, right? So what they wanted was a library of content about all of the ads, right? So all of the shows, all of the programming, all the content, all of the research, all the data, all the prices. So it was maybe, I don't know, like 300 or 400 slides worth of stuff. But for any one pitch, a salesperson was just pulling like 15 of those slides, right?
Mhm.
So they wanted something where they could customize, but then the marketing team wanted to be able to update, change a price, change a show, change a demographic, push a button, and have that update across all the sales presentations automatically. So the salespeople couldn't go out the door with the wrong information. And this was a hard problem before the cloud,
Yeah.
right? So we were updating off of CD-ROMs, we were updating off of like the corporate network behind the firewall. You know, I remember having conversations with like IT people about why their presentation should live outside of their firewall, because people who weren't in the company needed to see them, right? But we had to convince them that this was a good idea. So it was that, and then we built this thing for discovery. And what happened was the guy, so we had like this young hotshot executive who, you know, had this vision, and like we built it for him. And the first thing that happened when we delivered this thing was that guy got promoted, which did two things. One, I realized that all B2B sales, no matter what you're selling promotions. And like that is B2B sales. You are trying to make people look good to the rest of the people in their organization. And then two, I realized that this was a thing, right? So I decided to make the shift from doing service, one off into let's just do this as a product, and let's figure out who else we can sell it to. And the guy I had done the project with, not the design guy was great, but I had another partner that I had done the software project with, and I don't know, he got really weird. I've also learned that people get weird when there's no money and when there's lots of money, right? And in between, everyone acts really normal,
Yeah.
right? But as soon as there's no money or lots of money, everyone just starts acting weird. So this guy started acting weird.
Was that because of a lot of money?
Yeah, we made a bunch of money off the discovery
Yeah.
project,
And then he
which
got
was
weird.
good. And then he got weird, right? And part of what he did, he disappeared for a long time. So I ended up delivering the project. And then as soon as they were writing checks, like he showed back up and wanted to get paid. And then he decided to get in a fight. Like our guy got promoted.
Yeah.
So a new guy came in, you know, got hired to manage our project. And he decided to start a fight with the new guy managing our project. So we're like heroes at discovery. And my business partner shows up and starts a fight with the guy who controls our destiny, and wrote an email to the guy's boss saying what a terrible choice this guy was. And the boss printed it out, left it on the printer, and the guy found it at work, right? So then we got like fired, which sucked. But by that point, you know, I told the guy to take a hike. I brought in another business partner who was a designer, because I was like, I can do the tech, but someone's got to make these things look amazing, right?
Yeah.
And then he and I figured out how to sell it into every other cable network. So it took us a minute. And I have this very strong memory. We were in the parking lot of Cablevision out on Long Island, cutting out business cards, like in the parking lot, so we could walk in and like pitch them on this thing we had done for Discovery. But within like, I don't know, within a year, we had sold this thing into CNN, a bunch of the Turner properties, TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network. We had sold it into some of the NBC properties like Bravo. We sold it into USA and Sci-Fi, right? So like all of a sudden, like we were just this player in this industry that we had kind of invented, which was like the PowerPoint alternative. We got a bunch of magazine clients. So we had like InStyle as a client, we had Elle as clients, we had some of the Hearst properties as clients. Like it turned out there were a lot of people who wanted to make fancy presentations and control the content, and PowerPoint wasn't doing it. So pretty quickly, we had like a room full of people. We had designers working on the content. We had developers creating, the software. Like it was a good little business. So we
Yeah.
kind of figured out the sales, and it worked. So
At,
yeah,
at
it was
what
fun.
point, at what point did you say, okay, we funded, we're, even though we're cutting out business cards in a parking lot, like hopefully getting the line straight. Remember the business cards that
Funny.
had the perforated edges where they'd send you
That's
and
what
you,
it was. Yeah. No, it was the perfect, but the perforations wouldn't break properly, so we ended up using scissors
yeah,
because
because if,
otherwise you had these little like edges. Yeah,
yeah, you had a furry business card. So
that's what we were doing.
I remember those. Uh, so so from going, funded by client, like which I'm a huge
Yeah,
fan of getting started, right? If you can validate an early idea, build a business
yes,
and have customers fund it, that's amazing. At what point
right.
did you go, we need, maybe some outside money. Hey, let's go VC. Like, how did that work out?
Okay, so there is not a straight path to that. So I'll tell you a couple different things. One is we were really getting a lot of traction in some of these companies. So I started pitching some of the larger organizations like NBC and Turner. This was before they got bought by Time Warner.
Yeah.
I started pitching them on putting more money in, right? And really trying to use those corporations as a funding vehicle for us to grow. And what I learned was, and this was early, I mean, this was in the late 90s by this point, those companies weren't really set up to do venture investing. And it turned out to be a much tougher conversation than I thought it was going to be, right? So the money wasn't rolling in there. But that being said, we were getting, we were doing well from all of those companies. I just couldn't get them to like up their spend, right? Like they didn't want to pay for us to grow as a company. And then, so we were kind of hitting this weird ceiling, and part of it was I was 28 or whatever, so like I don't know how seriously people were taking me in these meetings, but at the same time, like we were underpinning billions of dollars of sales at these companies. Like they were running a lot of ad sales through us. Anyway, so that was one thing, and then two was, and so there was sort of a natural limit on how many people we could hire. And then two was, this was late 90s, and then the world started to fall apart. Like the dot-com crash hit, and a year later, like the World Trade Center got hit, and we were in, like our office was in New York City. We had a bunch of media companies as clients. And so between the dot-com crash and that, like we just, like the whole thing just hit a wall. Which kind of happened again this last year with COVID, right? Like every
Yeah.
once in a while the world just stops, and then all of a sudden, we didn't really have the funding that we needed. We didn't have the bank account that we needed to go through that. So what I found was we went from, having a room full of people, contracts with Fortune 500 company, money coming in, new clients, to all of a sudden our existing clients stopped paying. So we looked healthy on paper, but we weren't getting the checks in, and then we couldn't sell anything new. And pretty quickly, my business partner and I found ourselves laying off a bunch of good people, which is
Yeah.
still like years later, was still one of the worst days of my career. That feeling of like, these people have done nothing wrong. Like I promised them, we promised them a career, and we messed up, which kind of brings me back. And that really planted the seed of Rocket Pro Forma, right? That moment where I was like, I don't really understand the numbers. Things look healthy on paper, but they're clearly not, because there's not money in the bank account. Like, what am I not seeing here, right? And that really started the journey of me learning the finance piece, because I was like, I have to be as good at the finance piece as I am at the software piece, or I'm not going to be able to make this work. So the company was in distress. But that being said, we still had great clients. We had long-term contracts with the clients. We had good tech, right? So like I knew that we were eventually going to be okay. My business partner left as part of this. we took on some, like the company took on some debt, both from a line of credit at the bank, and then also I borrowed some friends and family money. Um, and it was like, it was kind of bleak, because I was down to kind of a skeleton staff and like we were in debt. And then we started, I started bringing it back, right? Like I nursed the company back to health. I paid back all of the debt. Um, and then I started talking to a buddy of mine who actually had gotten me started on some of the multimedia stuff. We used to work together at a CD store back when there were CDs at college. And he had turned me on to some of the programming stuff that I'd used in my career and built this whole business on. And we had stayed in touch. He had moved to California. I had stayed in New York. We started talking again. And he had done the venture backed thing before. And he was like, we should just take this presentation thing and run with it. Like, you've got a good thing here. So that was right about the time that Amazon Web Services was launching. So it was like 2007, 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
And he was like, let's rebuild it as a cloud-based app. Flash had just come out with Flex, which was like a development environment. So you could build like real software with a .NET backend. And this guy was crazy good. He was a crazy good full stack developer. So, and in a weird way, I went from being the technical co-founder to being the not technical co-founder. But he was great. And he started, rebuilding this whole thing in the cloud. And that was how we ended up starting to pitch VCs. Like he had the experience of pitching VCs. I had the customers and the working business, right? And he built like this amazing app. So we could walk into a VC's office and be like, here's the app, it's crazy good. Here, get on the phone with HBO and NBC and Sony, and they'll all tell you how great the existing product is, and they're all ready to switch. And so, and even then we probably did 30 or 40 investor pitches before, and it was really funny because you go through like 35 pitches, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, no, maybe do something different. Like, if you just change this, we'll invest. It's all like a bunch of nonsense. And then all of a sudden, we got 3 term sheets, 2 from investors and 1 from a strategic. The Citrix had the GoToMeeting product way before Zoom.
Yeah.
And they were really interested in, what happens with presentations online, right? So we had this cloud-based presentation app. And all of a sudden we got these 3 term sheets and like, it was fun, right? Like we could kind of negotiate the terms a little bit, ended up raising $2 million in a Series A from Hummer Windblad out in San Francisco. So like a real VC.
Yeah, that's
$2
a
million
real
bucks.
group, right? And
Real
$2 million
group,
bucks,
right?
that's a
Like,
real check.
$2 million shows up in the bank account. It's a pretty amazing, it was a pretty amazing experience, right?
Were you sitting there counting the zeros? You're like, wait a second, did they put the
Yeah,
right
like
amount?
log it into the bank account, like refresh, and then there it is. It was cool.
That's a unique feeling. All right, so you got to pause there. All right, so this what year was this? 2008ish.
That was the day we got funded. Actually, sorry, the day we signed the deal with the VCs, I think was January 31st, 2008. It was like the last day of the year. I remember I was on vacation somewhere where there was no internet. And like I was trying to use this fax machine to like sign documents. So I guess we got funded like the first week of January, basically.
Yeah. So then
of 2009.
You hit refresh on your computer dial-up, speed style, and you see.
That's right.
You see, I don't know what your bank account was before, but you see an extra $2 million in there.
Pretty much zero.
All right, so you see $2 million and $1.
Right, exactly.
You brought it to a positive, and
right.
What was the first thing that went through your head when you saw that, like, or your heart? Like, what happened internally when you saw that money come in?
I think 2 things happened. One is we were like, yeah. Woo! And then there's this sense of like, okay, so this is really only step 1, right? Yeah. Like now we have this money, we have to do something. And now we have this money and we're responsible to these people who gave us this money, right? Like there's this sense of like, all right, we really need to step up our game here.
It's a little scary when you take an investor's money, isn't it?
Yeah. I think in a weird way, it's the business equivalent of having a baby. Like you put all this work into the pregnancy and having the baby, and then you have the baby and you're like, oh, this is day one. This is
Yeah.
not like I'm not done. I'm just beginning, and I have this tremendous responsibility to like take care of this.
Now, I have three
Um,
kids. I did have some part in the pregnancy, but I didn't have a major contributing role.
I have two kids, and yeah, I play a very small role in the pregnancy.
I got it started and she did the rest of the work. All right. So
It's a
back to
lot of work
deals.
too.
Yeah.
From where I'm sitting, it looks like a lot of work.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
All right. So you built a company and so you're building this up and you said you had an exit event about, 10 years ago. At what point did you go, hey, maybe we should sell this?
Okay, so there's like a whole soap opera behind that. None of the answers are like a straightforward
Because
answer,
people get
right?
weird when there's no money and people get weird when there's a lot of
You
money,
got it.
right?
You got it.
Yeah.
So, a couple things. We were fielding potential acquisitions from the beginning, to the extent that like Apple was looking at us. So, and Apple does this thing where you have to sign like a no shop clause. So, like, Apple wants to come in for whatever 60 days and doesn't want you looking at anyone else. But there wasn't really a lot of time where we weren't talking to someone about a potential acquisition, because what we were doing was cool and we had good momentum. And again, credit to my business partner, like he had built something pretty amazing. So people came in and had this amazing experience. And then, we also had like some of these Fortune 500 companies floating around from my contacts. PS, my ex-business partner has gone on to start, I don't know if you've used, there's a company called Beautiful.ai that is a presentation, online presentation company. That's his company. So that's the next generation of
Oh, cool.
what we were doing. So he's still at it and still making a very cool presentation software. So there was like, we were always talking about a potential exit. Behind the scenes, there was a little bit of a drama, or actually a lot of a drama, which I think had to come. It came down to sort of a fundamental difference. And actually, let me say two things. I had been the CEO of this other previous generation, and I was a little burned out, right? Like when
Yeah.
I was CEO, we ended up laying a bunch of people off, and I was like, I don't know where I got this sort of self-awareness at 30 years old or 35 years old, but I was like, someone else is probably a better CEO than I am and probably knows more than I do. And I would like to learn from someone who knows what they're doing so that I can be a better CEO in the future. So as we were spinning up SlideRocket, there was this guy who was the awesome full stack developer, and there was another guy who I thought was going to be the CEO and had some chops. We ended up ejecting that guy. I didn't want to be the CEO, so I intentionally stepped back, and my co-founder took over the CEO role. And I did not get the education I was looking for out of that, but that led to the idea that we were using was my idea, which was B2B, right? I had these big name customers who were on my existing platform and wanted to come onto this new cloud-based platform. There was a shift in direction at some point where the rest of our company became B2C.
That's a
Right.
different
And
animal.
so it is a different animal. And when you do that, it's very hard to take care of the B2B customers because they're looking for a completely different experience in terms of security, scalability, feature set, right? The features that are important to them are different than the features important to the B2C. But, we could show a lot of growth on the B2C side, but the catch was we couldn't show a lot of revenue on the B2C side, right? Versus like I had a chunk of revenue. But as that decision was made kind of in slow motion, and I was not the CEO, so I was not driving that strategy, it ended up causing a lot of friction between me and my co-founder, right? And also a lot of friction between me and the Fortune 500 companies that were my contacts who were like waiting for this thing and not getting what they were looking for, right? And so behind the scenes, it started as a small amount of drama and turned into sort of a large ongoing, like just struggle, that eventually, as we were raising the second round, I ended up leaving, and they brought in, and this is actually one of the regrets of my life. I ended up leaving just as they brought in a real CEO.
So
So the
you
decision
missed
was
the
made.
mentorship. You missed
I
the
missed the mentorship, which sucks.
yeah.
But they brought in a real CEO who was an executive from Salesforce, knew what he was doing, um, and it still stayed B2C, although they did get some B2B customers. But they could really show the growth, right? And when you're a startup, you have two things that investors are interested in. One is revenue and one is growth, right? And it's even more powerful when you can combine both of them. But really, what we were doing became a growth story. And to this guy's credit, he came in and got us acquired within 14 months or something. And it was a real acquisition, by VMware, which is a publicly traded company, and got us acquired. And we were not in any way profitable or even massively revenue producing at the time. So it was really, an impressive feat on his part. And so he did a really good job of building the momentum, right? And then he
Yeah.
also did an insanely good job of negotiating. He was an expert at sort of getting a bunch of different potential paths going and then playing them off against each other. So we had a couple offers, one of them from VMware and one from another company. But we also, had the ability to raise more money. So he was a master at like getting the offer from, for the acquisition offer, taking it to the
Shopping
VCs
it.
and being
Yeah.
like, yeah, like we're going to get acquired unless you give us better terms, getting better terms from the VCs, going back and being like, look, the VCs are saying they're going to give us this sweetheart deal. That makes it really hard to take your deal, and turned this into a real acquisition. So kudos to him
Yeah.
for doing that.
Did it turn out okay for you?
It did. Yeah. Yes, it did turn out okay. We did. So it was a little bit rocky because of the change in strategy, right? We couldn't show the revenue, but we could show growth for that. Like I left right before the B round.
Yeah.
And so we ended up doing a down round, which, going back to the conversation about people get weird when there's lots of money and when there's no money, like there was a lot of struggle over equity because we were doing a down round and everyone was getting their legs chopped out from under them.
Yeah.
So don't ever do a down round. Uh, and it was a real sort of failure in strategy, right? Because we hadn't really thought through the implications of not having revenue and needing to raise money. Like you're kind of at the mercy of whoever comes in. And this was before the expert negotiator CEO came in.
Yeah.
So there was also, a struggle over equity. So definitely, I ended up losing some of my equity during that whole struggle because I was the guy leaving. But that being said, it turned out fine. I think the other thing, going back to the mentoring, the other thing that I didn't do was I didn't go with the company to VMware. So I think part of what happens during these acquisitions by big companies is you get this moment where you're like working at this big company for a year or two,
Sell your
and you
soul.
sell your soul, but you also learn something and
Yeah.
you get that on your resume. So I do regret not being able to sort of live inside a large organization for a year or two and see what that looks like.
Get that experience.
Yeah. For me, it's always about the learning. Like I'm
Yeah.
always looking for ways to learn.
So hearing your story, Mike, you have learned a lot, right? So from,
Yes.
funded by customers, partnerships,
Yeah.
deploying and ejecting, right?
Yep.
To raising capital, to switching from B2B to B2C, from, selling into very large companies. So
Yep.
you have seen an accelerated amount of learning in a
Yes.
compact journey, which is really cool. And I'm glad we're sharing this journey. So starting out as a technical founder, getting replaced by a more technical founder, kind of
Yeah.
like kind of like bouncing around, finding your fit within an organization. What happened? Now, this is kind of a personal question. As you were kind of like finding your fit within these organizations, what was going on mentally inside with your mindset, or like how you were, what was your mental health like, or your thought process like?
That's a good question. Let me also say one other thing. I think another switch I did was from service-based company to product-based company,
Yeah,
which
lots of
was also a
switches.
massive shift. And I talk to entrepreneurs about, I do a lot of work with a lot of different startups now.
Yeah,
And like that shift is really hard.
yeah,
Because the whole company, the product, the service, the people you hire, like the pricing, the marketing, all of it is different for a service versus a product company.
yeah.
And 27-year-old Mike was like, "Oh, this will be easy. We'll just build a product," but that's not easy. So my mental health, and again, I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs. Being an entrepreneur is really hard.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very much a roller coaster. Some days things are going really well, and some days things are terrible. And especially at the end, it turned into way more of a grind and drama. And there was all this sort of like struggle going on in the background. And it was making me really angry and frustrated, right? Especially because I was like going back and talking to like HBO and Sony, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, and I have no control over this, which is like a crappy message to be delivering to these big organizations. And it was almost like when we finally decided I was leaving, like there was this moment of relief. I'm like, oh, okay, I get my life back, and like I can be in control of my own destiny moving forward. Um, and so that was, I don't know. Again, there was this like moment of relief where I'm like, this is really isn't working, and now okay, we can move on. But also in the background, like it's cool when the stuff you're doing is working, right? So regardless of my struggles and what I was trying to do, like we were getting a lot of users, our product was cool, we were getting picked up in the press, like there was a lot of really cool stuff happening. And so there's this feeling of like, oh, we're building something that is actually getting used, and and that always feels good to me. So I don't know. It's funny. One of the entrepreneurs I worked with for a little while, he played on the NFL, right? And had a career in the NFL, and then left the NFL and started like a tech um, company building a coaching app
Yeah.
to train people like the NFL. And I remember having a conversation with him where he was like, entrepreneurship is harder than the NFL. And he's like, because at the NFL, you have a path, right? Like you have to work really hard. But if you show up and you do exactly what they tell you to do, you're going to have a successful career, right? And he's like, with entrepreneurship, I feel like I've been dropped in the ocean. It's night. I'm swimming, but I don't even know like which direction land is, or even if there is land, right? And I think that's like, as far as the mental health goes, like that's always the challenge with entrepreneurship is like, what is the set of tasks that if I work hard enough and do them right will lead to success? I've gotten better at that, but it's still hard.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is difficult. That and marriage. Those are like the two most difficult things in the world. The
Yeah.
most, like, I wouldn't change either one. Like I would still
Right.
always
Right.
be an entrepreneur. Like when you said, yeah, maybe work at a big corporation, like to me that sounds like, I've worked with major corporations, I've worked in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
government and such. I will always be an entrepreneur, right?
For a year
It's
or two, not for a career.
yeah, and like marriage is tough, but the benefits outweigh. So like that is such a great description of what entrepreneurship looks like from an NFL player. Entrepreneurship is tougher than NFL. That's pretty cool. So
Right. Like, yeah.
so
And
good,
he's right.
and he's right, and he's right. Okay, so before we hit record, you were like, yeah, and I do a little bit of DJing because you were asking me about what kind of
Oh yeah.
headphones I'm
Yeah.
wearing.
Yeah.
What? You're okay. Talk to us about your DJing. You know, uh, are you a professional DJ? Do you get paid to do this? Do you
I
like
was I was semi-pro for a
semi-pro?
long time.
Okay.
And it was always kind of a hobby. Like I played guitar growing up, and so I was in a band for a while. And then there was this moment. I guess in like the late 90s, where I walked into a place called Twilo in New York City. There was like this, turned out to be this famous nightclub, and Sasha and Digweed were playing, and I had never heard anything like that in my life. And I'm like, what is going on? Um, and just fell in love with electronic music. So started figuring out how to DJ, but it was always like a hobby in the background. But I always felt this pull of like, I never had enough time to spend on music. And then I got like, I mean, I was an entrepreneur, I was a developer, I was spending nights at the office, like sleeping on the sofa because I was coding until 4 in the morning and then waking up and on deadline. So it wasn't like I ever had enough time to really plug into the music thing. And so I had this moment, and I'm like, I don't know, I was 43 years old at the time. Like, we had this exit. I guess I was 41 when we had the exit. So we had the exit, and like, I have some money in the bank, and I'm looking at my life, and I'm like, I'm not married, I don't have kids, I don't even have a mortgage. Like, I lived in New York City, so I was always renting. I was like, I could just take a couple years off, do the music thing full time, and like, this is probably the last time I'll be able to do this until my 60s, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm just going to do this. So I spent like a few months planning it out, and then just pulled the trigger and was like, I'm just going to see what happens if I do music full time. And it was fun because I had some resources, right? So I built like a pretty cool home recording studio, and the band got difficult. In sort of mid 30s, like everyone got married, had kids, right? And then so you're trying to get five people's complicated schedules to align. Whereas with DJing, and this was why I started DJing more and more, it was just my schedule, right? So
Yeah.
I could always figure out my schedule and show up. And I still got that feeling of live performance, right? Which is very different. There's nothing quite like performing live. So DJing gave me that, plus they would pay me. So I DJ'd like in nightclubs all over New York City, which was just fun. Like, I don't know, I did all kinds of events. I DJ'd at cool places like the Museum of Modern Art. Like, I don't know, there's just random, DJing brought so much random stuff into my life. And so I took this 2 years and was like, I'm just going to produce music, DJ, like see what happens if I do it full time. I built this home recording studio. I started basically recording songs with like singers and rappers, and New York's a great place to do that. And sure enough, 3 months into this, I meet the woman. Actually, I was DJing her friend's birthday party, so another great thing that DJing brought me. I meet the woman who's now my wife, right?
Yeah.
So we start dating. A year later, she gets the offer, like a job transfer offer, to move to Miami. I'm like, okay. I mean, it's like the one time in my life where I'm not tied to anything. I was like, you caught me at the right moment. So moved to Miami.
You got to pause. You got to pause, buddy.
Yeah.
Let's take you back to that party, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to this party. Here's Mike. You said you were 43-year-old DJ up on the stage.
Yeah.
Spinning disc. Got the big headphones on, disco light popping. What kind of music were you playing?
Right. I was playing kind of a blend of all kinds of different stuff. Because that's what worked in. I had this vision of only doing dance music, but that never worked at like parties where normal people were. So it always ended up being kind of a mashup of all kinds of different stuff. But then like a lot of like dance remixes of stuff or hip hop remixes of stuff, but that people could sing along to.
All right. So what? So you're putting on. I'm gonna run a scenario here. You're playing.
Yeah.
You got the DJ going on. There's this pretty girl at the party, and you put on. You're like, oh, I'm gonna put on my go-to song, right? The song that I want. I want to meet this chick, right? I want to meet my future wife. What's your go-to song? You pull out the vinyl and you slap it down. What's your go-to song?
So usually Whitney Houston or but like a cool remix of that. Actually, Kygo had a decent remix of Whitney Houston like 2 years ago. That kind of thing where there's like a modern vibe to something that the girls want to sing along to.
So
and that's actually
song...
the fun of being a DJ. And I used to love this about DJing.
Yeah.
Like, A, I got the live performance thing, but B, everyone comes and talks to you. Eventually, everyone at the party comes and talks to you. So it's a great way. Like, if you want to talk to someone, it's a great way to talk to them.
So I go back and we're at this party and your wife sees you. Does she go and talk to you?
She came up and
So it
made
worked.
a request for something. Yeah, no, it totally worked. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Now married and kids.
Now married with kids.
Awesome.
Uh, and that's also how I know she loves me, because I was a musician when she met me. Uh, and I stayed a musician. So we started dating 3 months into this.
Yeah.
I made it go for like 2.5 years before I went back to like, so we had moved to Miami and had been living here for like a year and a half before I started getting back into the tech scene.
You
So I
got
know she loves me.
it. People are like, what's your husband doing? He's like, oh, he's a DJ. I understand. Like, oh,
Yeah,
cool.
that's
What
right.
kind of music? Oh, he's actually break dancer.
Yeah,
Are you a good
that's right.
dancer?
I am all right,
Okay, got
but not a great dancer.
it. All right. So
Decent,
talk
decent.
decent. So talk to us about Rocket Pro Forma. Like she's like, okay, you guys are having this conversation. You're like, you know what? There's this big need in the marketplace. I'm going for it again, getting back in the tech game. What that look like?
So I started getting back into the tech game because like I knew a lot, right? So because I'd been through, to your point, I'd been through all these different chapters of like my tech career. And it happened sort of organically because I started working with a bunch of different startups. Um, and I got down to Miami and was kind of watching the tech scene, but I was doing the music thing. But then I just sort of started plugging myself into the tech scene in Miami and ended up, there was like this day where I went in to see this accelerator, and the one of the partners at the accelerator was like, will you run our accelerator program starting next week? And I was like, okay. And so I start running this accelerator program, which was really cool. Like, it's like 12 weeks of education about like modern startup theory. And what had happened in my career was it was all school of hard knocks, right? It was all like I was reacting to things. I was trying to learn information as quickly as I could. But it was all kind of made up, and I never really got the mentoring. So what happened when I started running these accelerator programs was I got to layer in like what should I actually have done, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted me to do some of the teach a bunch of the curriculum, but also develop some of the curriculum. So that's a great way to learn, right? Like I could sort of go and figure out how you're supposed to do these things, and again layer it on top of how the world actually works, right? So now, and then try to explain it to people. So like simplify it and really learn the concepts until I can explain them. So it's really been a fun process. I've been doing that for like 10 years, and I ran a couple different accelerator programs, and then just started running my own kind of coaching. And I'm a presentation guy, so I'm really good with pitch decks and sales decks. I've raised money, so I ended up having conversations about fundraising, pitch decks, and what I kept seeing happen with people was the same thing I had happened with me. Like they just didn't understand the numbers, right? So if you're pitching investors and someone's going to give you $2 million, they want to know how you're going to spend the $2 million, right? I mean, you don't have to be exactly, you can't predict the future, but they want you to have done some thinking about it. And kind of circling back to when we raised our money, right? There's that moment you see the money in the bank. We had built a financial plan, and actually I had built a lot of the financial plan for that fundraise. So that was part of my transformation into someone who understands the numbers. Was as I rebuilt my company from near bankruptcy, I started doing my own books. I started being the guy doing QuickBooks. I started learning the accounting and the finance so that I would know it at its core. And then as things got more complicated and we brought more money in, right? Like I started building the financial projections that we used to raise the money. And so when we raised the $2 million, we started running the plan that we had pitched to the VCs. So we used that plan. The money lasted about, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 months. We ran the financial plan, and obviously we updated it over that time, but like we ran the hiring plan, we ran according to the projections we had made. And like I just realized there's like this hole in the marketplace, right? And sometimes I get very involved with the startups I coach. So one of the startups I got very involved with was trying to solve traffic, and actually had a pretty good, we were starting to actually make some headway. We chose Miami as the launch city, And it was a reward system that pushed people towards public transit and shared scooters. And we were actually starting to see some traction, and then COVID hit.
Gosh.
And like all public transportation stops, like traffic stops. And it turns out global pandemic is how you solve traffic. We had not put that on the whiteboard, but that's the answer.
How come you didn't see that coming?
Didn't see that coming. So I had this moment like where I'm looking at that. And originally, like, COVID was supposed to be a 2-week lockdown. Do you remember that? It was going to be 2 weeks. We're all going to go back to work.
They got that wrong.
And so over the course of the 2 weeks, I'm like, this is not a 2-week lockdown. Like, nothing is going back to normal anytime soon. This traffic thing is going to happen, but not now. And a lot of people are going to have to start or pivot their businesses. And this finance thing is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving the traffic thing and just launching, like, on April 1st of 2020. I already had a template I had been working on. Like, I already had the beginnings of product. So I just posted it online, created a website, and was like, we're off to the races here.
Yeah. So give me an idea. So I'm a startup. What size startup is this a sweet spot for?
Up to Series A. So it's either idea seed, or Series A. And then usually after Series A, you have some kind, or you should have some kind of finance function inside the
you have a
inside the
controller,
organization.
a CFO come in and helping you
Something.
with it.
Yeah.
So idea seed Series A, that's the sweet spot for you. A founder comes to you, I like how you said that. A non-finance founder comes to you and goes, Mike, we need to raise some capital. We're a mess, right? Like, what are the two, 3 things that you're going to help them with to help get ready?
Right. The 2 things for me are coming up with a plan, right? So I have a template, and I love my template. My template does some things that other templates don't. But at the end of the day, use any template, right? Because someone has done a bunch of thinking that will help you, right?
Yeah.
Like, going through the template forces you to look at all the pieces of the business, not just what you think the pieces are. And that, like, you want the plan, but you also want the mental map, and you don't get the mental map unless you go through a good template.
Yeah.
So that's,
you help them create a plan, and
yeah.
then with the template, help them fill this in, right? But
right.
It sounds like you have a desire, and you say you wind up getting involved in startups. Like
Sometimes, yeah.
when you're sitting across a startup and it just looks like a really good idea, right? And you're like, I want to get involved. What does that founder look like, characteristics wise, right? Skill sets wise? What do they look like to make you go, wow, this person's interesting, and they're probably going to be pretty successful. They're going to raise money. They're going to have like, what are some things that stand out to you?
Okay. So, and this is the key to fundraising that I end up explaining to people all the time. As founders, we like to build things. So what we want to talk about is what we're building and why we're building it. Investors, which is really the question you asked me, has the subtext of which companies would you invest in, right? What investors want to talk about is the team, the traction, and the customer acquisition. And in a weird way, the product, like what we're building, becomes like a secondary item, right? And team, traction, and customer acquisition are the primary. And if you don't connect on team, traction, and customer acquisition, it doesn't matter what you're building. So there's this mismatch when people pitch, because, like, entrepreneurs are builders and we want to have this conversation about building. So we spend 15 minutes of our presentation talking about what we're building and 2 minutes talking about team, traction, and customer acquisition. The answer to your question is, when I see startups that are actually accomplishing stuff, right? And a lot of times people accomplish stuff without money. I think one of the main journeys of entrepreneurship is doing as much as you can with the resources you have in order to acquire more resources so that you can do more, right? And it doesn't matter whether you've raised the money or not raised the money, you have resources and you can accomplish a lot with those resources. And the money is another resource that you will raise, right? So when you see someone hustling and moving the ball down the field and getting stuff done, and it's the difference, like I do, I've gotten involved with a company called MedZoomer, right? And they plug into pharmacies and hand deliver with couriers the medications to people's homes. So it's like a service for pharmacies
Drug
that their
dealers.
customers uses, right? Drug deliverers. And so the difference is, like, a lot of the companies I talk to are saying, when we raise money, we will do this, versus MedZoomer is like, we're already in 16 states. Like it's just a different, the whole conversation feels different with people who are able to generate momentum using the resources they have.
Yeah, that's awesome. So
Yeah.
for a group out there who has a decent team traction in customer acquisition, or maybe they're trying to figure this out, but they're willing to go the work, what's a good way for them to connect with you and find a way to get some help with their financials, their financial plan, their template? What's a good way for them to find out more about you and do a deal with you?
So the short answer is rocketproforma.com, right? So and there's a resources page. So I have a bunch of free templates and stuff that people can use to plan out their business, plan out their pitch deck, plan out their financial projections. I also have the template for sale on the site, which you can either buy as a self-serve or buy with an hour of coaching time. So that's one way. And the coaching time is fun for them and for me. And then I also do like a free Q&A session every 2 weeks. So actually today at 1 p.m. Eastern time, I am doing a free Q&A session because this is the 2-week cycle. So that's also great because people can just bring whatever questions they have about pitch decks, financials, fundraising, and we just kind of talk it through during the session.
Yeah.
So that's another great way. And then I have a ton of stuff up on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and look up either Rocket Pro Forma or Mike Lingle, I have videos about all kinds, the same topics, right? Pitch decks, financials, fundraising.
Did you say that it was actually possible to have fun with pro formas?
Yes.
Fun with
Yeah.
financials?
Yes.
That sounds awesome.
I think, again, that moment where you really connect with it and start to understand it, right? And I think, if we really break down the financials, the expenses are relatively easy, right? Everyone knows how to spend money, and you can kind of imagine spending money and how you're going to spend more money. I think the place where people get tripped up is on the sales projections, right? And so part of what I've done in the template is create some Lego blocks, so you can kind of pick your revenue model and either pick one or combine them. So you could have transactions, you could have subscriptions, you could have a physical like manufacturing inventory, and you can pick one, or you can mix and match them, and then you flow customers in, right? And I think that piece of like figuring out how to flow the customers in and what that looks like and what that's going to cost, and how that affects the growth of the company, like that's really the piece that people need the help with.
Very
And it's a
cool.
little bit of making things up, right? Because we're early stage and we don't know what's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's also, that's part of the process. And again, it creates that mental map. And, people come in because they need to raise money, right? So they want this financial projection because they have to show it to someone, which is fine. I think that's great. But really, what I'm trying to help people accomplish is that, all right? So yes, you can go in and confidently pitch investors, but also for you, connecting the dots so that you can run the business, right? If you raise the money, if you don't raise the money, you can run the business. You know the levers to pull when things go well. You know the levers to pull when things don't go well, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be driving the bus, and you need to know how the steering wheel works. And business is finance, right? Like that is like businesses are numbers. That's it.
Yeah. So last question. We're at a party. You and I are DJing, co-DJing a party together, right? We're having fun. We just helped sell, we helped a company, a startup, raise $200 billion, right? So we're having this
A lot of money.
lot of money, but they use Proforma or
Rocket Pro Forma.
Rocket Pro Forma. They used Rocket Pro Forma. We just raised billions of dollars. We're having a blast, and it's time to get the party pumping. What's the you pull out the from your ninja backpack, you pull out this vinyl. What's your go-to song to like really crank up a party?
Usually Missy Elliott remixes work really well.
She's
I have
good.
some really good dance music remixes of Missy Elliott. And actually I heard one here in Miami that was like a Latin beat remix of
Ooh,
Missy Elliott. It's really good.
pretty
Yeah.
good. All right. So
You
Missy
want
with
people to sing along, but you want to catch them with the groove that they haven't heard before. And like that works really well with crowds.
yeah. So we'll actually we'll have Missy be come to the event, right? And
Excellent.
we'll
Perfect.
dance
We can
with her.
afford her with that kind of money.
Exactly. So, hey, Mike, thanks for coming on the show. People in the audience, especially if you're looking to have some fun with financials and to maybe get some help with raising capital, head on over to, all the links to the websites and such will be in the show notes below. So if you're driving, please be careful. But, click on the links, connect with Mike, find a way to thank our guests, and then do a deal with them. That's the purpose and the mission of the show, is to connect deal makers together to do deals, to raise capital, build startups, build businesses, buy cool things, and have fun with good deal makers. If you're working on a deal, want to come talk about it on the show, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form. We'll get you on the show next. We're going to do 500 of these by August of 2022. We're going to have some fun. Till then, talk
That's
to you all.
amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of freaking work. Till then,
Yeah.
we'll talk to you all on the next episode. Hang in there, Mike. Let's chat.